Hello, today we are looking at a car that many of you have been asking to see for the last couple of years, and it has been so hard to track down a decent example. So today we are showing you this PA Velox from 1959. Once a really popular car in the Vauxhall lineup, it's now so rarely spotted at car shows, and I think the last time I saw one was in a museum. So it's quite exciting to take this out today and show you. Now it's rather chilly on the moors today, so apologies for the slight shiver and the winter coat, but that's what it's like as we film through winter. So in today's video, we're going to take you for a walk around the outside, show you the inside, under the bonnet, inside the boot, and we're going to show you a car which Vauxhall was so very proud of and which was loved by hundreds of people around the world. So first of all, let's kick off the walk round. Life is too short to drive something boring. So if you're looking for your first classic or your next classic, why not check out Bidding Classics Auctions? Whether it's something pre-war, mid-century, or maybe something newer like a retro hot hatchback, check out their website. There's a link in the description box below, or you can Google Bidding Classics Auctions. There's new stuff going on the website every single week, so why not check them out? Now let's go back to the video. Although Vauxhall had used the Velox name before on the Wyvern cars, the PA lineup of cars, which included the Velox, as we're testing here today, and the Cresta, came into the consciousness of the British car buyers in 1957. The PA Velox, which is what we're testing here today, was launched in the October of that year at the British International Motor Show. It had the 2.2 litre engine, as did the more heavily specced up and chromed up Cresta. Now for me, I think this is a really interesting time for motoring, because some of the younger section of the car buying market were hankering over what they saw in America. They didn't just say, oh well, it's a brand I've always bought and this is what I want. They started demanding more. Now, of course, Vauxhall was part of GM, which meant that they were well placed to tap into the right people in America. Now, I know quite a lot of you at home watching, because you always tell me you're big fans of American automotive. So you're probably looking at this car and thinking, wow, that looks really similar to one of those mid-50s, like 55 Chevy Bel Airs. And actually, I thought that when I went off and did that Victor out, that's what that reminded me of. But actually, looking at this, you can also see the similarities as well. Now, the new Velox and Crestas had those wraparound screens that were so popular on American cars, and they were a marvellous new concept for many Brit automotive buyers, because of course they'd been comfortably accustomed to small screens, trusty pillars. This was quite a big thing. Now, it might not seem a big thing now, but I want you to appreciate how revolutionary this is, because of course at the time a lot of people in the UK had never left the UK. They only knew what they saw at home. And if we look at one of the most popular cars of the 1950s, the Morris Minor, even back then they had that smaller screen. In the early 50s they had that smaller back screen, and you had such limited visibility. So when you look at this and you look at those wraparound screens and you see how much more visibility you get, how much more of the world outside of you you can see, it actually feels quite astounding, especially when you get inside. And actually, whilst we're talking about that rear screen, if you are a bit of a Vauxhall aficionado, you might have noticed this one is actually quite rare because it's got the 3-part rear screen. Now, if you look at the later cars from, I think it's from the 60s, like the early 60s, they get a 1-piece rear screen. However, wrap screens aren't the only American flair on this, and you'll notice a few other bits, and you were going to have to pick a Cresta. That was never an option on a Velox. And also you've got loads of chrome just for the sake of it, especially again if you went for a Cresta, they had a lot more chrome on than you see on this Velox. And so if you think about it, it must have looked absolutely wild at the time when it was parked in a car park next to the more commonplace British marques of the 50s, things that people were used to seeing like Austin, Morris, Rover, Wolseley, even the old Vauxhalls. This was something totally different, and it arrived with an absolute bang. Now, engine-wise, the car we're testing today is a 2.2 litre, and 1959 was the last year of this engine, because in 1960 they went up to that 2.6. The output on the 2.26 six-cylinder engine, as we've got here today, is 83 horsepower. But we've talked a lot about this. There was a lot of export to overseas markets, part of the Commonwealth at this time, and interestingly, if you bought this in an export market, where fuel was expected to be lower grade, the compression ratio is actually slightly tweaked and you only get 78 horsepower, so it is slightly decreased. Now, overall, it was an exciting car for exciting times because we talk about it later, but the world was changing rapidly. And the late 50s saw the dawn of the motorway. I think the first one opened in 1959 and 1960 saw the first MOT. And I talk about that a little bit later in the video. And for me, I think looking at this, Vauxhall delivered a forward-thinking, ambitious, modern-looking car for a new era. And it did really well. It was really popular because from police forces to pop stars and even the dear late Queen Elizabeth II, that PA Velux Cresta range was well loved by a lot of people. But they're really rare now. Parts are hard to get. It's hard work keeping something like this on the road compared to how it was in the 50s. So who would own one today? Well, let me introduce Steve, who is possibly the most Vauxhall-centric man I've ever met, and also jolly good company.
Hi, my name's Stephen Bottomley, and this is my 1959 Vauxhall Velox. I've been into old Vauxhalls for quite some time, especially PA Crestas and Veloxes, and I've always wanted an early three-window car. Probably since the early 1980s I've been looking for one. Every time one's come up, I've always not had the money or just missed out on it or one thing and another. But I eventually found one that ended up being so rotten and missing so many parts I couldn't do it up. Another one I bought, and I was just getting it back on the road when this one came along. And this one was just the exact right specification. If it was 1959 and I was down at the Vauxhall dealership and they said, "What colour and what model would you like, sir?" I'd have picked this one. Haven blue, beautiful colour. The Velox is just that, I think it's a slightly more pure design than the Cresta. There's not quite as much chrome, there's not quite as much bling. Then the three-piece windows, the dashboard, the dials, everything about it is just wonderful. I'm really glad I found this one, although it came along at not quite the right time, but when you find one, you find the right one, you've just got to buy it because you may never find another one.
Now, this is rather an imposing vehicle. It sits at 14 foot 10 in length, which is quite a step. Cresta. Let me just stop you there because there wasn't actually that much in it money-wise. In fact, I think there was £90 in it. So this was £983 after sales tax, and the Cresta was £1,073 after sales tax. So there's not that much in it, but actually when you get into it, you did get a lot more for your £90. You've got all the superficial stuff like all the chrome and all the rest of it, but actually once we get into this, there's a lot missing for that £90 that you're probably going to want. Now, one of the nicer things about this particular car is we have the original bill of sale. So we know what somebody's voted to get at the point of sale, and we know what's been added in afterwards. And you know what? There's only one optional extra that they picked, and it cost £3, and it is this armrest in the front seat. That is all they opted for. So they didn't worry about a heater, they weren't worried about a radio, they weren't even worried about windscreen washers. For them, this was all that mattered. But thankfully, somebody's thought about adding a few bits in afterwards. So this radio, which has been slightly tweaked now, so it didn't work when Steve got the car. So instead of mucking about with it and getting all rebuilt inside, he's had a really discreet wire put in the back so he can just plug his phone in. This heater works, and trust me, the heater is fantastic. So even when you're sitting behind this front bench seat, and you might think you're not going to feel any heat, it actually whacks out quite a fair bit. And so even on this cold January day, you've still got enough heat coming in that you're actually warmed up. So they've been retrofitted, as has this. I love this sun visor. I've got one to go on my Morris Minor. That's been done as well, and the white wall tyres. Now, coming in front of us, everything is quite Spartan. So over on the left-hand side, you've got your speedo. And on the right-hand side, you've got your temperature gauge, your fuel gauge, you've got battery health there, or ammeter, and then just down here, you've got a light for your ignition and you've got a light for your oil. But there's something on this car that you may never see on a Velox again, and it's actually something that Steve's invented himself, and I think is really cool. So whilst the car is very original looking, it has had a small tweak. Now, it's on the column change, as you see here, and it's 4 forward, fully synchro mesh gears, and that was something that Vauxhall were really proud of. And for the 50s, that was a massive thing, because as you know, many of the cars we've tested haven't had synchro on that first gear. But Steve has done something which, for me, I think is a really clever invention. He's put overdrive into it. Now, this was something you could get on second and third gear on the later cars, so Steve's changed the gearbox over, and this switch here, which sits above the key, was originally for some spot lamps on the front bumper, but when Steve got the car, the front bumper was a bit rusty, and he said, you know what, I'm actually going to turn that into an overdrive switch. So when we go for a drive, I'm going to try and show you that, but that's what that is now. For me, that's quite clever, and I think that we talk a lot about modifications in these videos and what's a good modification and what's a bad modification. I think we can all agree, no matter how to the point you like to keep it, that is a really clever thing that Steve has done. Now, we have got a glove box in here, and just like the boot on the car, there is so much space, and that is something that Vauxhall talked about when they called it, you know, all the sixes, and they said, you know, got that 6-cylinder engine, you've got room for 6 people and for their luggage too, but they've really thought about the space all over the car, and it's been really generously put together, including these pockets that sit below the glove box that you can slot paperwork into, or extra bits and pieces like maps. In fact, to just write it off as the poor man's Cresta, I think does it a complete disservice. It's a brilliant car in its own right. So even if you couldn't stretch that extra £90, you still got a car that was well built, that was stylish, that had plenty of room for all the people. And so it's no wonder that Bedford Police actually had some of these running in their fleet. And I think various police forces all over the country did, but I know for a fact that Bedford did, because I've seen them all liveried up. So you're probably wondering what engine we've got if you don't know too much about these. So the earlier ones of these had the 2.2, which of course they had in those E-series that came beforehand. But if you go for a later one of these, they have the 2.6, which I think was in the Cresta from much earlier. But yes, that's everything that, pretty much in a nutshell. You've got that umbrella handbrake, and as we go for a drive, I'm going to demonstrate this column change for you as well. Now, we talked when we were in the Hillman that you could choose either floor or column. In this, column is standard. So without further ado, I think it's high time I started it up for you. Now, I know it's I'm gonna have to wipe that window, aren't I, before we go for a drive, but let's get it started up. That is so quiet. And you know what? I've always heard from people, oh, Vauxhall's this era rot, oh, they're rubbish quality. But I've just never seen that. Every example, and I know it's only the good ones left, but every example I've seen has been thoughtfully put together. It's lasted really well. You don't get all the knocks, bangs, rattles, and they are nice cars. And they are also, to be superficial, very attractive. So that's what it sounds like on the inside, very quiet. Let's flip the camera around and you can hear what it sounds like from the back as well. Now, I know we haven't set off yet, but I reckon the traffic lights are about to turn for us. So we'll set off. I'm going to show you how easy this column change is. because I think there's a perception that column change is incredibly hard to get your head around. Now bear in mind that I've only been in this car for about 10 minutes now, and as you can see, it is so easy. In fact, I would say it's more pleasurable than some of the cars you take out that have got change on the floor. Now I didn't mean to come off here, but I'm going to carry on anyway and just chat to you as we go, because one of the things that Vauxhall said when they brought this to market was that, and maybe some of these drivers could take note, is that when you were in a Vauxhall, you were the best driver, or you were the best version of yourself as a motorist, and it was something that they were very proud of. And they said they achieved it by all the things that they built into the car. And there's a cultural reference point that I'm going to bring back to this actually. And the things that they said made you a better driver were, number one, you had synchro on all forward gears, so it meant that life was really easy. You weren't having to rev match, double D clutch, worry about going into the next gear. Everything was very straightforward. You had a hydraulic clutch. The brakes were improved from the outgoing E-Series. They were said to be 37% more effective. You had a recirculating ball bearing on your steering, which meant that steering is light, it's responsive, it's the best that Vauxhall can offer you. So all in all, it's meant to be a stress-free drive, which I tell you what, it would be if I wasn't having to deal with all these other people around me on the road today. But what's it like to drive in today's world? And how is it stood up against other vehicles and the test of time? Well, let me tell you, it is fantastic. In fact, this is probably one of my favourite test drives of recent times. And I wish it wasn't getting dark so quickly, because I would like to take this out for another hour or two to really enjoy it to its full potential. Because that's the thing about these old Vauxhalls, is that whenever you get into them, not only are they stylish, but they're also really easy to drive. You've got this wraparound screen to the front, which is lovely. It's not only visually pleasing, but also gives you really great visibility. You can see everything. The pillars are slightly set back, which means that it doesn't hamper the view of the wing mirrors, which does tend to happen in some of these older cars, even though the pillars do always tend to be quite small. Now I know that with this being one of the earlier cars, it's got the three-piece screen at the back, but because you've got that wraparound functionality, it does mean that you get incredible visibility. So even though the car is, you know, she's a big girl, well, for the time, and I suppose even for now, you get into it and you immediately have driver confidence that I just don't feel like you get in a modern car, because so much is cut off from you and you're so desensitized to what's around you. Now I talked about that cultural point that I wanted to mention, and that cultural point is the MOT, because MOTs were introduced in 1960. So when I talk about some of these points, and these points that it was upsold on, things like the fully synchro box, that hydraulic clutch, you might say to me, well Steph, these are Bobby basics. But a lot of people were weighing in cars and buying new cars, and things like that were a huge thing, because some of the cars that they were weighing in were 30s cars, 40s cars, jalopies that were well past their prime because they'd never had to go through an MOT, and therefore had just been patched up and patched up and patched up. So for some people, they were going from a world where things were so different to the world that they were stepping into with this, that when they got into cars like this, they just could not believe how much technology had moved forward. And it's such an interesting time for cars, because you look at cars from the 40s and then cars from the 60s, and that technology moves at such a rapid rate that it's almost exciting. And coming in this, you know what, it's exciting. I love how it looks, I love how it drives, it's an easy car to drive, it's pleasurable. And you know what, the £3 was well spent, because your armrest here, oh, it's just absolutely lovely. And Steve has gone through 3 of these. This is his 3rd, and he is a Vauxhall man through and through. I feel like that's all I've ever known him to have. And every time I get in one of these, whether it's a Velux or a Cresta or even a Victor, I love the driving experience. It's lovely, it's calm, and it's luxurious in a way that people expect that you're only going to get from those high ticket cars. So Steve, count me in for a Vauxhall. I am sold. This has been a fantastic drive. The only thing that I guess that I can say that's maybe poor about the cars is that if you are trying to buy an example for yourself, you're going to have to really look again, because quite a few of these are hiding a myriad of nasties. They are hugely, for some reason, they are hugely attracted to rotting as quickly as they can, which means that great examples are few and far between. But from a mechanical standpoint, from the standpoint of the car when it was brand new, my goodness, what a car, what a driving experience. It has been a fantastic day out. So until next Sunday, when we're looking at something again completely different, take care and drive safely.